So, meeting number 3. We don't have to talk about this one. We already just talked about that. Officers, all that thing. Oh yeah, we were gonna finish our first-person character movement. So we had, I think. Let me double check. I think we had. Yes, we were just working on the movement stuff, and then we kind of ran out of time. Um, the last time we had a meeting. Oh, and for anybody that might not know, not many people showed up for the meeting last week, and so we actually turned it into like a project day for everybody working on the Lights Out project. Little shout out to that. If anybody wants to work on it, it's right here, and you can basically just join in, and we can you can be part of basically our first server-wide group project if that's something that interests you. It's going to be like a horror first-person game, um, so it should be neat. Kind of inspired by like Resident Evil, I believe, things like that. All right. So let me get my notes pulled up. Okay. All right. So last time we had our we had a speed variable to obviously measure speed. We had a gravity variable to tell us how fast we want to fall to the ground. And then we had these float x and float y input that get access access variables. Little recap of these. It has a string inputted for both of these because Unity has. I'm gonna see if I can find it. I don't know off the top of my head where it is, but Unity has a default. It has these default controls that are already labeled, and you can refer to those just by using strings, like right here. These default controls are things like I think one's called fire, and fire is automatically bound to mouse 1, so you can just type whenever you want like an input parameter, or not a parameter, an input from like a keyboard or a mouse. You can just put in fire, and it'll say, okay, I know that fire means mouse 1, so I'm looking for mouse 1. This input.getAccess is going to be your WASD keys, and it's just going to be the just direction you're pressing with your WASD. So we have that. We're going to go ahead and just jump right into adding some more stuff here. We're going to make a vector 3, call it move transform.right. Another quick recap just for people still kind of learning Unity. A vector 3 is one of these little things with these arrows. It's just called a vector 3 because there are literally 3 vectors. Once again, it's like useful for things like any of the stuff you can do up here with the moving something, rotating, stuff like that. You can kind of do most all of that with a vector 3 variable. So what we're literally talking about here is just we're creating a vector 3, those little arrows, local to the update method, and we're getting information from it so that we can update other things we need. So we're doing this vector 3 is equal to move, or is move equal to transform.right, and transform.right is your vector 3. You have a transform, and that's also, I think, a type of vector 3 if I'm not mistaken. And the transform is just a position, rotation, and scale. And whenever you see transform.right or transform.whatever, that's literally just saying, okay, go right, or go forward, or do whatever, right? And so we're just basically setting this vector 3 equal to this, and we're going to multiply that by some things. We're going to do transform.right times x plus transform.forward times z. Now what this vector 3 is it's telling us the position we want to move to. So what we're basically getting here is we're taking our inputs, our WASD keys, I think by default, and we're saying, okay, we're going to use transform.right, which is if you're moving to the sides, any of the sides, and transform.forward if you're moving forward and backwards. And we're not using this one, this upper one, So you have a right here, and so that pushes you right and left. You have a forward, this front blue one pushes you forward and back. This other one makes you go up and down, but we're not worried about that yet. So we're not going to have that in this move thing quite yet. And so you're taking those transforms and you're multiplying them by your input. So like you're inputting x, you multiply the transform by x. So you're moving left and right with A and D. You're multiplying your transform.right to move you left and right. Same thing with your forward. And so you're making this vector 3 we're going to use in another part of this update method as that, like, just something to hold all that information. Have we made our character controller yet? I don't think so. So we're going to make a character controller variable. Controller. We're going to call it controller. And what this is we're going to use it as a reference for this character controller we made up here. As a little recap, the character controller has a capsule in it, a capsule collider. You can see this like little, I don't know how Discord's quality is, but these little green lines are basically showing what this thing has in terms of collision, so what it'll bump into and stuff. It also, a character controller will have just other general information about the move distance. It has a slope limit for, like, if you're going up a slope, it'll tell you, you can change what the angle is you want to be, like, it's the maximum threshold for how steep a slope you can go up. So, like, currently it's 45, so if you go up a 45-degree angle slope in the game, if we were just to have, like, a triangle right here, you could walk up that, but if it was anything greater than 45, you wouldn't be able to walk up that, it would be too steep. That's useful for just things like climbing mountains and deciding how much mobility you want your player to have, things like that. So we're making a reference to this that we're gonna put the reference on here later. So we're making a controller here, and we're gonna do controller.move. We're gonna do let me see if I can pull up the API on the move method. Unity API character controller, and we have move. Just supplies the movement of a game object with an attached character controller component. So this move we're doing right here, we're saying we want this controller, which we're going to use is this controller, basically our entire character, to move with the parameters we give it. And the parameters for the move, it looks like it's just a vector 3 for the motion you want it to move. Well, now we have a vector 3 that stores all of the information we have for our inputs, our left and right and forward and back. So we can just set this controller.move, and we're going to supply the parameter of move times speed, because we want it to go how fast we want our speed to be, so that we can change that later as a variable. We're going to do something a little weird here. We're going to multiply by x, and then plus transform.forward times z. Now the reason for that... Oh wait. Double check, I think I messed something up. Controller.move. Move times speed. Right, sorry, I messed that up a little bit. I was rereading the past line. Move times speed times time dot delta time. A little recap. Time dot delta time is basically just a variable that tells you how long has passed since the last frame was ran on your computer. So basically, you know, the game runs 60 frames per second. If you have everything optimized correctly, this is going to tell you, okay, if you're on frame 59 out of the 60 in a second, it tells you how long has passed since frame 58. And basically what this is you can use it as just a general time variable, just for things like rates. So like if you have something like velocity's position over time, you can do a position and then divide it by time, and you get and the time that you want to use is time.delta time. So the reason we're putting in move here is we have our vector 3 and we're multiplying it by speed because we want to say how fast we want to move it, and we're multiplying it by time because the way that the physics, I believe, works with the speed, you want to make it to where it's multiplied by time because speed's a rate. Just to say that without getting super in depth with it. Fortunately, the physics stuff isn't super important beyond these basic movement things, but it gets a little confusing, so if we need help with that later, we can work on that. But that's just a kind of basic baseline reason that we're doing that right there. Let me double check. I think we might have... We can try and see if we can walk around now, because I think this might be all we need to just do simple walking. We're going to add jumping in a second if we can. So name z does not... Oh yeah, so I didn't create our z variable. Because I did this last time. So like last week in the lights out project stuff, I made the same mistake. I just put y here instead of z. That's my problem. And so we replace the float z here with that right there. And the reason we do z is because, get the second to compile, is because I'm pretty sure this right here is the y. Yeah, you can see right here it's got a y for the green. This is the y. So if we did a y for this movement thing, it wouldn't make any sense. We'd basically, just the naming doesn't make any sense. We want it to be z because z is the actual other direction other than forward and back and whatever. So I think we can do that. And, okay, you should have your player movement script already attached to your first-person player, which is where your character controller should be. Once we created that character controller variable in here, that we called controller, the Unity now wants us to supply a reference for controller. Well, it needs a character controller. We have one right here, so we can click on character controller, drag it right there, and that should be exactly what Unity wants from us. We're going to try and launch it, and hopefully if things worked, we'll be able to move around. And we are. Okay, cool. So I can hold WASD and walk around. Now notice, I can walk right off of this thing, and I can just sort of float. I have no way of going up or down. I can't jump, and if I fall off, I'm just going to not fall. I can just keep walking wherever I want. So before I continue and we can start with jumping and gravity, is there any issues anybody's run into so far? I'm going to go to the meeting plans, or not the meeting plans, the meeting chat, if you just want to type. But if for the people that have been following along, if you don't say anything, I'm just going to assume everybody's where they need to be. All right. Cool. All right. So then I guess we can go ahead and jump into gravity and jumping. So we're still going to be using this player movement script because we want to put, with some small exceptions in most projects, all of your kind of movement stuff that's core to the basic gameplay into a single script. So let's see, we're going to make, okay, so we're going to introduce you to Czech Sphere. So we're going to go ahead and create a Boolean. Now, a little bit of a difference. In C#, you're going to type just bool instead of Boolean. Has the exact same thing, it's just a true or false. But in here, it's just called bool. We're going to call it isGrounded. This bool is going to represent whether or not we're touching the ground. And the reason we want to know that information is because if we're not touching the ground, for example, if we're jumping, we don't want to be able to jump a second time in the air unless you're playing like Super Smash Brothers or something and you have a double jump, and that's the game you want to make. But in regular physics, of course, you can't jump a second time in the air. So we are going to check and see if we're on the ground using this Boolean as a little bit of a reference and say it's true if we are on the ground and false if we're not. And then from there we can tell if the user should be allowed to jump or not. So we have our isGrounded. We're going to go ahead and set using it. So we're going to set what Boolean is equal to in this update method. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to check every frame if you're on the ground or not. Because since the game is running in frames per second, one frame you might be in the air falling, and another frame you might be on the ground ready to jump again. And so you want to update, however many times per second Unity runs for you, and say, okay, are you on the ground? Are you on the ground? Keep checking that, because you don't want to just check once and then never check again, because if you do that, then you could easily just be on the ground or not on the ground and not get that information when you need it. So we're going to go ahead and set our isGrounded variable. We're going to set it equal to, I'll go ahead and open this up in the API for you. Let's go to the physics class. Right here. So the physics class has just a lot of as you can tell, physics-related stuff. You got things like gravity, raycasts we can talk about later if we do like shooting and stuff. But what we're looking for is Czech Sphere right here. I might have mentioned it before to some people, I don't remember. But Czech Sphere is an imaginary sphere. It's basically you're creating an invisible sphere, and you're going to say, okay, if something is within this sphere, we're going to return true. If it's something that you're specifying. By that I mean, like, you can just use a general Czech sphere and say, okay, if anything at all is touching this invisible sphere we're generating, then we're going to return true. Or you can set a specific thing. Actually, right here, it's listed as a parameter, the layer mask. You can choose things that you want to ignore, that you don't want to return true, or you just don't want it to consider at all, if it's supposed to return true or not. That's going to be useful in our case because this sphere might accidentally, it could for example accidentally list the player as the ground and just always return true, because the player is part of the capsule that we're going to make. The player is just going to be within the bounds of it. So we don't want that to happen. And so we're going to use this Czech sphere, and we're going to give a parameter to say, okay, ignore unless it's got this specific flag on it. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a second. So we're going to do physics, if I could spell, .Czech sphere. So let's check the Czech sphere thing. Our first parameter we want is a vector3 position. Well, we actually need to make another one of those for our sphere. You'll notice the Czech sphere thing, basically most of this is just creating the sphere. You have a position where you want the sphere's, like the center to be, right here as it says. And then you want a radius, just how big you want the sphere to be. And then from there you, of course, can generate a sphere with only those two pieces of information. But we need to tell it where we want the sphere to have its center at. So we're going to create a new variable, just call it public transform. We're going to call it ground check. Simple enough. And so this transform, once again, we're going to just use as a position. So we can say, well, in a transform you have a position. So we now have that information about where we want to put our ground check. So we want, where were we? Yeah, Czech sphere. The first thing it asks for is a position. So we're going to say ground check. Czech sphere ground check dot position, because you want the transform has position, rotation, and scale, so you want specifically the position part of it. And then next we want a radius is our next parameter right here. So let's make a radius variable. Let's make it, we want it to, unity is measured in meters, the distance in unity is. So we're going to make it relatively small to check how far this is. We're going to do public float ground distance. We're going to set that equal to 0.4. It's a float, so we're going to put this F thing. This F thing is a little sort of confusing, even to me. Just the general rule that I follow is just put an F after every float value that you put in. This has a decimal, and we want to be specific with it, so of course that's a floating point number. So we put that here. So we want our ground distance, the radius of our sphere, to be 0.4, so we'll put that in there. And then the last parameter we need to create really quick. We want a layer mask. The best way to describe a layer mask, the way I tried to describe it, is think of it as like a flag, something that you can, it's a piece of information that you can say, okay, this is part of this group, in a way. So, right here, you'll see appear whenever you select anything in Unity, you have the inspector, you have a layer. And the default layer is default. But you can say, for example, I want a water layer. Why would I want a water layer? Well, you can say, I want this object I create in Unity to be water. And so you can say, okay, if you're in water, if you're in something that is flagged as water, then do something specific. You know, you swim in water instead of walk. So you could say, I want to swim. You just run the swim method when you're in water, but the walk method when you're not in water. What we're going to do is we're going to make one. You can click Add Layer after you, or with this layer default, click that and click Add Layer. We're going to add one. User layer, we'll just do user layer 6. We'll call it ground. We just want to say, okay, well, we want to be able to tell what's the ground. And so once you do that, you should see up here, ground is now an option for the layer. We're not going to assign that to our player because the player is not the ground. What we want to select is this plane right here, the ground, the actual ground that you have hopefully created. And you're going to click layer, and you're going to click ground. Now what we're telling Unity is, okay, now we know that this is the ground. So what we're going to be able to do with our Czech sphere is say, ignore everything in this sphere except for the ground. So only return true if something is within this sphere and it has this ground layer flag on it. So we're going to create a variable up here. We're going to call it public layer mask. That's what that layer thing is. I'm going to call it ground mask. So we can just go ahead and supply our ground mask as our parameter because that was one of the last things we wanted up here. We can ignore this last bit. It's optional. It's like a overload thing. So you can just choose to have less parameters and just ignore this last one. So now we're just saying we want to generate our sphere. We have our where we want it, we have how big we want it, and we have what we want it to return true if we have inside the sphere, which is of course the ground. I guess while we're talking about it, we can go ahead and place the position for that sphere. Give me 1 second. Alright, so on this first person player, we're going to create, or we're going to right click on it in our hierarchy. We're going to click create empty. Little recap, an empty object just holds nothing but a transform position. That's it. So nothing is going to happen if you run into it in the game whatsoever. It's just useful for holding data pretty much exclusively. We're going to call this our ground check. You'll notice that it should be, if you right-clicked on the first-person player, it'll be in the very middle of that. You can just put its position down, I believe, just on the y-axis right here, just by -1. And it should put it at the very, very, very bottom of your player. So we're going to use this as our we're going to use this as our position for our sphere. So when we generate this sphere, this Czech sphere, it's going to create an invisible sphere right here that it's not going to see, but we're going to be able to tell, Unity's going to be able to tell that it's there. If this sphere touches the ground, or anything that has this ground layer we put, it's going to return true in this Czech sphere. So, with that in mind, we now know that isGrounded is only going to return true if the ground is within that sphere, which makes things actually a good bit easier for us. We're not going to make the reference for that yet because I haven't saved or compiled this yet, but we'll get to that whenever we're done. We usually want to save our references for the very end. And then I think I forgot my semicolon there. We'll put that there too. And so we're going to go ahead and create an if statement here. And we're going to say if is grounded. And then the if statements work pretty similar in C# as they do in Java. You can just put the double and that just means and. Velocity.y is less than 0. I want to say velocity.y equals negative 2f. So what we're saying here, velocity, keep in mind the y direction is just your direct up and down. So if your velocity, your character's velocity, is in the y direction and is downwards, aka negative 0, or less than 0, we want to reset this velocity. What this is, I might have gotten a little ahead of myself including this already, but it is pretty simple, I think. Basically what we're going to be having is we're going to have, like real-life gravity, you're going to accelerate to the ground. If anybody's taken a physics class, you hopefully know that gravity accelerates. The acceleration of gravity on Earth is 9.81 meters per second squared. Since you're accelerating, you're basically just going to be constantly increasing your speed, so you're going to be faster and faster moving to the ground. Well, the way that we're going to have this set up, we're going to say, okay, accelerate to the ground. I mean, that's what you want to do because that's how gravity works. But what will happen is if we don't include this statement right here, our velocity in the y direction, our acceleration downward, is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger infinitely, because it's just going to keep, the way that we're going to have it work, it's just going to keep updating and saying, okay, accelerate your velocity in the y direction, because that's how gravity works. So what we use is this velocity.y, if you're on the ground and you have a negative velocity, if you have that gravity effect take on you and you're on the ground, we want to reset the velocity every single frame to be negative 2, so that you will have a constant velocity downwards, and it won't just be something like you walk off of this little cliff and instantly plummet, just disappear. It'll instead be something like you walk off this cliff and you slowly fall, and you slowly get faster as you would with gravity. So we'll leave that there, I believe. Oh, whoops. Keep going, look ahead. Right, okay. So speaking of that velocity.y, our velocity in the y direction, what we're going to want to do, let's create, we already have our gravity variable, so we're going to say our velocity in the y direction is going to plus equal gravity times time dot delta time. Remember, earlier we talked about time dot delta time somewhere right here. We talked about, because if you want to associate something with a rate, you kind of generally have to use time dot delta time, because that's how actual physics formulas work. A distance over time, a velocity over time, all those are rates. And so for that to work mathematically, any rate has to have a time associated with it, and so you're going to involve a time dot delta time here. Once again, this is more of a physics concept than a computer one, so if it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you directly, and I'm not the best at explaining it, that's just fine. You don't have to worry. It's kind of just the important fundamental stuff here that should hopefully not come back and be super relevant for the rest of the time you make your game. So that's why we have this up here, is because you'll see that we're basically literally adding to our velocity this gravity every single frame. Well, I guess not every frame, because you're multiplying by time dot delta time. It's going to be every second. So you're increasing your velocity every second. And we don't want that to constantly happen. So if you're on the ground, we're going to reset your velocity to just be negative 2, so that if you fall off of something, you will just slowly fall off. And at the end here, if we have time, we can do a little example of what happens if you take this part off. And then next we're going to do... Okay, bind MZ. Oh, okay, they're gone. So what we're going to go ahead and do is controller.move velocity times time.delta time. This right here is the exact same thing we did here, except with velocity. We're saying we would just want to move this entire controller right here. We want to move it. So we want to move it downwards at our rate time.delta time times velocity. Same thing as just moving it to the sides. There's no difference. And then we're going to add the last statement in our update method. If input.getButtonDown jump. Jump is one of those default Unity things with these strings. It's one of the default Unity controls, and it already knows that jump is your spacebar. So if you press the spacebar, input.getButtonDown is just saying if this button is being pressed on your keyboard, it will return a Boolean value. If input.getButtonDown and you're pressing the spacebar, and is grounded equals true if you're on the ground because you don't want to be able to jump in the air, then velocity.y equals mathf.square root. So this is a C#'s mathf class. I'm pretty sure Java has one as well. It's just filled with math functions like square roots, probably natural log, exponential equations, things like that. It's just got an advanced mathematical function that you can't perform instantly, like 2 + 2, whatever. We're going to do the square root of jump height times, and I'm pretty sure I did not make a jump height variable yet, but we'll just finish this first, times -2f times gravity. Make sure, do we have a jump height? I don't think we do, so we'll make one of those. We want to do just public float jump height. We'll set it equal to 3f for right now. Keep in mind, all these variables you're creating right here, all these floats and stuff, if they're public, it's not going to compile yet, but you can actually already see our speed and our gravity are right here. You can just click and either drag, you see that this will increase, or you can just delete it and type it in. And you can change these variables just by changing them right here, which makes things really awesome for like playtesting and stuff. It makes it really, and debugging as well. You can just tweak things just to your liking really, really simply in this Unity menu. So we created our float jump height. And that's just how high we want to jump. And so we're saying, okay, if you press jump, we want to jump the square root of our jump height times -2 times gravity. That sounds complicated. Basically, this is just how you're counteracting the gravity in a way that makes sense to Unity, I guess, is a good way to put it. It's another physics-related thing, but basically you're saying, I want to jump, however high, and multiply it by gravity bringing me down. Gravity is negative, and this -2 is negative as well, so you're turning that into a positive and multiplying it by jump. You're taking the square root because in certain physics equations there is stuff squared and all that stuff. This is just a big physics thing. Once again, not something that's incredibly important to you as you make Unity projects, unless your project is heavily physics-based, in which, of course, you might want to learn more about physics anyways. So, double checking, I think we might be ready to save and compile here. So I hit save. Let's see what Unity has to say, if the console gives me any errors. Nope, which is good. So now all of our new variables we created are showing up down here. Our ground check was this thing right here, the position that we wanted to spawn our sphere at. So we're going to click on the ground check and grab it and bring it over here. And since the ground check is a transform object on it, or a component, then it can already tell, okay, I just want the transform component, that's all I'm looking for. I'll just take that. We have our ground distance, which is just how big we want our sphere's radius. And then we want our ground mask. Well, we created that already. We want it to just be called ground. And so that means that the Czech Sphere, once again, is making sure we're on the ground before doing anything and returning anything true. With that, you'll notice my character is already floating. So hopefully we'll spawn, fall to the ground, be able to walk around, jump, and if we fall off the side, we will fall and plummet into oblivion because we don't have anything to get ourselves back up yet. So let's try it out. We're walking around. Let's see if we fall off the side, and we do. That's a somehow that's a good sign. We're gonna stop there. We're gonna try to jump. Spacebar, and we can jump. Perfect. This is exactly what we were looking for. You can now look around, walk around, jump, and fall off of a cliff and die. All of the exciting Unity experience summed up in, what, 40 minutes is how long we've been doing this? So that's exactly what we were looking for. And we can file save up here. You can't die yet. You're right. Victoria's right. Unfortunately, dying is not something you can do yet. So I guess I'll just check in again. Everybody that's following along, any problems at all? All right, Victoria's good. Everybody's quiet, which I usually take to mean good things. So I think we can end off this tutorial part of the meeting here, and we can talk about, with our remaining 20 minutes, we can talk about a little bit of game theory stuff. So we already did our first-person character movement. Cool. So, I kind of just threw something together because I didn't really know a good way to start talking about game theory. So I just wanted to, I guess, open up the floor for people to talk, because I know I sort of hog all these meetings up, and I would like to get to know people and talk. So if anybody wants to, just speak up at any moment. We're going to talk about Evolve. Evolve is a game that came out a few years ago. I want to say 2016. And it was really, really hyped. Basically, the game was a bunch of hunters. I think this picture shows it sort of well. 4 hunters trying to kill one big monster that's really scary. It's one of these asymmetrical, they call it, because there's an uneven amount of people on each side of the game. It's an asymmetrical sort of shooter game. It's like a Left 4 Dead almost sort of thing. Very similar to Dead by Daylight, for if anybody's ever played that game or heard of that. And it went really, really badly. It had miserable reviews whenever it came out. And I want to sort of talk about just like a little bit of a game design philosophy thing really quick in here. So I found a Reddit post. One of the game designers for Evolve talking about why he thought, like, just it's kind of a little bit of a big list of why he thinks the game sort of failed. There was one thing in specific that I wanted to find out about it. Right here, okay. So it might be hard for you to see with my Discord. If you want, you can Control F to find what I'm talking about, but here's him talking about the 4v1 mechanics in general. He said, well, 4v1 was awesome. It sounded awesome. Everybody loved it. We prototyped it, and it worked. Sort of. A friend of mine said very early, and I think he was right, that the reason it works is because we're all role-playing Evolve. In other words, we all knew how we wished the game would work, and so that's how we played it. When someone on the team finally got tired of this and started playing to win, it sort of fell apart and never really recovered. So I drew some little crappy MS Paint graphics to sort of explain this. So Evolve, of course, has 1 killer and 4 survivors. Killers trying to kill the survivors are trying to escape. I think maybe in Evolve they were hunting the killer, though, so I could be wrong about that. So the general idea, how it was designed with this in mind, it was designed with the idea of the killer's going to be big and scary, and he's going to scare all the survivors because he's really powerful, and the survivors don't want to be anywhere near him because he's gonna be big and strong and kill him really easily and whatever. So you want to have them You want to feel the killer player to feel like he's powerful, and you want the survivor characters to be excited because they're running away from something scary. That's exactly what they signed up for. Well, what Mr. Colville is saying here is that eventually, when someone tried really hard, typically on the survivor end, they would get out of that like role playing idea. They would get out of the mindset of, yes, the killer is scary, and I'm afraid of him, and I want to run away from him, because I don't want to die. So what would end up sort of happening is the survivors would get sort of aggressive. They would get out of that roleplay mindset, and the killer loses a lot of power in that situation because the survivors are now playing to just win. They're trying to do all these crazy, hardcore, sweaty strategies to try to beat the killer. And the killer, it happens both ways usually. I just didn't draw the killer one. Maybe the killer gets really sweaty. He tries to only go after a single survivor to bully them out of the game, and then that way it's one killer versus 3 survivors, so he gets more powerful. Things like that. You start to lose the roleplay, the fun of the idea of fitting your role in the game, and you just start trying really, really hard to win. You lose some of that. So, I guess something I wanted to talk about was, just open up the floor really quick. This is one topic. We're gonna talk about another one in a second. How would you suggest trying to fix something like that, where, you have fun whenever you're role playing as whatever you're trying to be, but if you actually want to win and have a good chance at, if you make the game competitive or something, then you kind of lose the roleplay, and one side gets to be really powerful, and then the other side doesn't have fun and whatever. Is it okay to have that happen in a game? Should you force players to not be able to play as sweaty or as powerful with really good strategies? How should you balance a game around that? Like, maybe newer players are brand new to the game, and so they are easily fitting into this role-play type scenario where they're just fitting their role because they're brand new. But a more veteran player has learned so much and has learned to overcome the requirements of their role to where they just play sweaty. Should you balance it around the newer players? Should you balance it around the top-level players? Something in the middle? Does anybody have anything they want to pitch in, maybe?
Well, as someone who plays more role-playing games, I will say I generally see a lot more games that try to lean into the role-playing. Then I also think of, Skyrim, where it's supposed to be yeah, you're supposed to, role-play as, a knight or whatever going around, but then you end up becoming a stealth archer, no matter what your build originally was supposed to be.
Right.
So I feel like there just has to be an understanding of even if you're making a silly SpongeBob game for kids, there's gonna be people who take the game way too seriously and are gonna start speed running it and coming up with crazy strategies. So definitely taking a hard stance, but as someone who leans more towards RPGs, I would say I lean more towards just ignoring anyone who would take the game more seriously than I intended.
Right. I'm kind of with you on that, really. I personally really, really love getting into a role in the game, and it makes the game feel almost like a cinematic, like a movie and depending on the game you're playing, it makes you feel really, really cool. If you're the killer, you're like, yes, I'm big, strong, powerful guy. I can kill all these puny little people. But if you're a survivor, it feels really awesome whenever you each have, your own role. Like, maybe one guy is a sniper, one guy has a shotgun, and he tries to get in close, and they all have all these different abilities and stuff. And you're like, yes, we worked together as a team and took down the big, giant monster. And it sort of, in my opinion, really sucks whenever you break that and people try really hard and do all that stuff. And it sort of just kills the game in many ways. If anybody has any additional thoughts, we can feel free to share them. Otherwise, I can move on to the sort of last part of what I wanted to sort of talk about.
I guess for me, maybe you could have some sort of like scaling algorithm since it's a multiplayer game. Like if you know that like okay, these four players are at this level, you could give the person who's the killer like a scalable amount of like power to be able to balance that out possibly.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess through testing you would figure out like what sort of like the crutch mechanisms are because that kind of happens in any sort of like online game like in Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Like there's always one or two guns that almost everyone uses and not really any of the others. So like maybe if they found out like what those were through testing, they can have it like okay, we have all these elements even though we know only a few of them are really going to be used, and then maybe sort of build like a lot of the game interactions around that, even though that might not be originally what they want, but that's just the way people play it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. And I'm glad you brought up the whole thing about Call of Duty and how they always have like two guns. That sort of fits in oddly to this, where the sweaty mindset, I guess we could call it, the breaking the RPG barrier and just trying to play to win, sort of hurts everybody. It hurts even the person that's breaking the barrier, because I think, in my opinion and in my experience, what happens is that takes a lot out of the life of the game, like how much you enjoy playing it and how much you think there is, how much there is for you to learn. Because while you might take it at like a slower pace, you play with your role playing stuff in mind. Everybody has a good time, and you build that experience over time. If you just sweat, you look into everything and you learn everything about it as fast as possible. You tend to like, really quickly. Okay, I know how this all works now. Every game, like every match, maybe if it's a multiplayer game, might start to feel the same or really similar. It just sort of kills the vibe for everybody. Because then, if you're the sweaty tryhard person, all the other players are not going to have any fun because you're sweaty tryharding all over the place. So it kills the fun
Mm-hmm.
for you in the long term, and it kills the fun for other people. And even from if you want to get even bigger, even from a business standpoint, this is a really bad thing because say these four survivors, um, say your game is really cheap or perhaps even free, or maybe someone is just really rich and buys games without you know committing very much to them. What if these four survivors? What if you're a really experienced sweaty killer here, right? And you have these, even one of these new survivors is like brand new, and you sweat and you beat the ever living crap out of everybody. Do you think that like survivor that just got his experience just destroyed? Do you think he really wants to keep playing that game? And if he doesn't want to keep playing the game, that means that he might refund it and the company loses money. That means that if the company has microtransactions, he's not going to be buying them. The company loses money. So even like on a bigger scale like that even happens. It can be a detrimental thing for everybody.
Right, for sure. So I guess it really comes down to balancing the amount of power they have relative to how much power the killer has, and also trying to give them options
Hmm.
to where like, it kind of feels balanced, but also not to where everyone feels like okay, we need to use this one method or it's not even worth doing.
Right, right.
But
'Cause,
then that
yeah, like, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
that is the fun for some people is like going in, like pre-ordering the game or whatever and getting it early and figuring out what the meta is. Sometimes that is what people enjoy, and if you do take measures to like take that away from them, like I tried to run a Minecraft server and like made everything way more difficult in order to stop the like one group that would like speed run whatever and
Right.
ruin everything.
Hmm.
They quit. So we lost like half of the people on the server because that's just what some people are into.
Right, right. That's a really good point, and I can relate to that pretty well too, having having played my fair share of Minecraft. Um, I know exactly what that's like. It's really if you're doing something like a survival or whatever, when someone just gets really really set on okay, you got to find the first part to get to the end. You got to find like the stronghold. You got to go to the Nether, get all the crap from the Nether you need, the blaze stuff or whatever. I'm not as you can tell, I don't even know all the stuff really to get to the end very well, despite having played the game for a little while, because I don't try hard it. I enjoy getting into the game, slowly building something that's not even necessary, like a farm or something, or really cool architecture, things like that. It's just kind of like, I guess, a different player mindset. That's a good point you made about how people enjoy getting all the meta stuff, though. Because that is something that a lot of people, I can understand that a lot of people like to do. Maybe the fun in the game for you is doing good, or maybe like a maybe someone is not that great at other games except this one. Maybe if it's like a recurring thing like Call of Duty, they're only good at Call of Duty, so it's the only thing they look forward to. They like to get in and crush everybody else in their path or whatever. It's a difficult decision. You know, all these things have pros and cons. That's why I thought it was a good idea to bring it up. Is that I thought people would have, you know, conflicting viewpoints on what should be done. If nobody else has any comments, though, we can move on to the next part, which sort of is related to what we have here. So I'll give, like, you know, a few more seconds if anybody wants to jump in.
I would like to add that I think we're talking about an asymmetrical game here, and I think those are absolutely the hardest things, like, in terms of the multiplayer video game world. Those are the hardest games to balance, just because one side has a set of tools that the other side doesn't, and their tool sets are completely different. Whereas if you're in a game like, I don't know, TF2, everybody has access to all the same classes, the same weapons. It's just, in that case, that's just down to preference. Really, I think the true solution is just time to a lot of this balance thing. It's just figuring out, okay, what are these guys doing? Is it too powerful? Look at win rates, adjust accordingly, and slowly but surely, you should ideally get to a more balanced and fun experience as the game continues to mature.
That's a really good point. Yeah, you're very, very right about asymmetrical games being so difficult to balance, because exactly what you said. They're just literally, both sides are completely different. And typically with these asymmetrical games, people form their own, like, civil war within the communities where, you know, the one person killer, because they're usually in the form of like a killer survivor thing. The big killer guys are always the bad guys, or maybe the killers think that they always get bullied by the survivor characters. When really it's just each game sort of ends up being different because of the massive difference in the tools at the disposal of each side of the game, like you just mentioned. So I think that's a really important point. And I think that, Evolve is a generally, unfortunately, rare example of this sort of thing. Most games that are well known have this balanced out pretty well. It always ends up being a problem. Sometimes, like, you know, we talked about Minecraft was one, and that's a, you know, veteran game right now. But you know, it's really just up to the game, I guess. Sometimes, because some games will always have pretty equal player tools at the player's disposals and stuff. So I guess I'll try to move on and fit whatever I can in our last few minutes here. This sort of continues on off of the last thing we were talking about. You'll see in a second. So keeping players engaged. Do you remember the first time you played one of your favorite games, and do you remember the wonder you felt when you played it? And if you do remember something like that, try to consider how long it took before that wonder started to fade. And the wonder I'm referring to is like just seeing so many things that you have absolutely no idea what they are, but being so excited to learn about what they are. Really, it can apply in any type of game. It could be a first-person shooter. It could be like, you know, Evolve. It could be something like, in my case, I have this picture here for a reason, Minecraft. So whenever I was much, much younger, the first time I played Minecraft, I found what I later realized was a village, not knowing what a village was. and saw these dudes right here, and I was so confused as to why like Ernie from Sesame Street had made it into Minecraft, and I spent a lot of time just like watching the earlier version of the game, the villagers, just be really weird, trying to understand their behavior. I was completely mesmerized because they look so weird, but it's like in the earlier version of the game, they were like one of the few friendlier mobs that wasn't trying to kill you, and it was like they were just peaceful and they were just walking around and they made all these weird ha noises, you know. So I was baffled by the villagers in Minecraft whenever I first saw them, and of course later learned what they were. But that's like one of the classic examples I have in my brain of thinking of something, you know, wow, it's so cool. I have no idea what's going on, and I love every second of it. And now something like Minecraft, I can still play and enjoy, but I don't have nearly as much enjoyment as whenever I was completely baffled by everything I found. I made a graph here. This is enjoyment over time. This enjoyment, I'm going to say, is measured in smiles per hour, we can say. And this right here is going to be the time. Generally, what it feels like, at least for me, I could be wrong here, you get a massive, massive increase in enjoyment. And it sort of slowly, over time, pretty linearly wears off before you end up just never playing the game again or taking a long break, kind of right around this area. So I guess I wanted to just bring up the point for a couple minutes. We might go like 5 minutes over or whatever. What do you guys think games can do, or what do you think games already do that can help maintain player enjoyment? I have this bulleted list here I was going to add. Anybody that had any thoughts, I could just add whatever they say on this list here.
I guess it kind of... Oh, you can go ahead.
No.
Oh, I guess, okay. So, what was I saying? I guess it kind of depends on the kind of game, but overall it comes down to introducing new content throughout, like, as time goes on. And, yeah, like, and not being repetitive. Because you don't want to see the same thing over and over, but you also at the same time want to have new content that's also engaging and different, but I guess not too different from the core gameplay loop, if that makes sense.
Right, so I'm assuming the new content is like updates and stuff like that, new features, things like that.
Right.
And reducing like repetition, you're saying like these new features ideally would, like you said, fit the gameplay loop so that it's not completely outlandish, but at the same time offers a brand new experience every time you play.
Right.
Perhaps you're thinking something like procedural generation in a game like Minecraft. Every map is pretty much guaranteed different.
Yeah, like that's a good example. Or like for MMOs, you know, like every, like, I don't know how long, it depends on the game, I guess, but every season or so, they're like, okay, here's this new expansion pack, new enemies, new playable characters, like new areas to explore, where it's like, okay, every one of these probably kind of fits into their core gameplay loop, but they're also unique and sort of special in their own way to kind of keep players drawn in and engaged.
Right. Those are both very good and very, I think, relevant answers to this question.
I guess just like to boil it down to like for every game, it's just introducing new areas, or constantly introducing new content, but also not making it too different to what got the player into the game in the first place.
Right, very true. Did anybody else have anything?
That's pretty...
No, you can go.
I wish there was, like, a better way to, like, judge who talks win in calls like these. But, that was pretty much what I was gonna say. One thing that I think of is, like, Pokemon and how it doesn't do this well, because nearly every battle feels the same throughout the entirety of the game. So definitely having something to change up gameplay, or having a story, because I generally don't play multiplayer games, so if there isn't the hook of like, yeah, you have this new weapon that you can use against players if you go to this new area. For a single player game, having like a something hooked in the story to actually compel people to finish the game.
Right, right. That was a good point you brought up about Pokemon. I know exactly what you mean about Pokemon. That's one of the big problems. People always complain kind of these days. Among other things, there's a lot of reasons people complain about the newer Pokemon games and how you're kind of right. I mean, with every game, they sort of follow the same formula, and especially in terms of like regular battles, it's basically just even if you get different Pokemon that look cool, act different or whatever, the same core gameplay is 4 moves, choose one, deal damage, and pretty much if you're really hardcore, aim to one-shot kill every opponent you fight. So there's like not even really a fight to it anymore, anyways. And so I think that's a really good point. But then adding on the stuff about introducing new content and repetition and all that stuff. That's a good point.
I think I have something I can add to the list. Essentially, this is going back to those sweaty players. Gives the players something to master. Don't make everything too easy. Make sure that even for weapons that might be, say, kind of easy to use, make sure that there's a higher skill cap for that weapon. Like, if you want to make higher skill ceiling, then I think that's definitely a good thing. If you want to make the weapon easy to use with a low skill floor, that's fine, whatever. But I think definitely giving players new things to learn, little nuances about a mechanic or just about the gameplay in general can help people stay engaged.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Yeah, for people that really love to learn everything about a game, this is speedrunners is a good example. Certain multiplayer games that are designed with these type of difficult mechanics. But really, I mean, in my head, I think of speedrunning sometime about a year ago, I watched a video on Mario Kart Wii speedrunning, and how there were certain parts of the map where it was literally just a matter of mastering timing for certain things. This is actually a good example. Smash Brothers, competitive Smash Brothers. People love it because there is a character to master, and along with the flashiness of the game, it makes it feel really, really rewarding, pulling off things like combos and stuff. But also, I added in here myself this little thing right here, allowing new players the option to avoid. So, maybe if we're gonna jump back to Smash as an example, Smash is a really fun thing for pretty much anybody that's interested in fighting games. It's people love it because it's pretty easy to pick up and learn for the most part if you know basic mechanics of fighting games. But then you have this massive skill scale where you can really, just dedicating time and energy to it, you can really become just a true master of a game. But it's so accepting to newer players. Another example is in certain games, maybe if you talk about having a weapon with different stats in a video game, or maybe features of the game. You might not need to use this weapon with certain stats, or maybe you don't need to use this feature, but doing so and learning it really well can certainly, it might offer a much better benefit than sticking with something that already works. A good example, a game I played, Dead by Daylight, I've talked about plenty of times. Much like Evolve, it's an asymmetrical. There's a character called the Nurse that's a killer, and she has actually statistically the worst kill rate. She's statistically, on average, the worst killer in the game. Ironically, she's really the best when mastered. she's got a very, very difficult ability that new players find pretty frustrating and just all around hard to use. But once mastered, this ability she has is so unpredictable for survivors that it's basically unbeatable. There's no counter to it. So that's a great example, talking about things that someone wants to master. A reason for them to keep playing is to become the best of the best in a lot of cases, or maybe not even the best of the best, but just, learn parts of that game that they, dearly love that most people don't know about, perfecting something that can push you to the next level in terms of your play. Yeah, that's a good example. If anybody has anything else, we can sure talk about it. Otherwise, if you guys want, we can cut the meeting off here.
Here's maybe the last thing I had to add, just kind of a rewording of what I said earlier, maybe expanding the core gameplay loop. Because maybe, you're changing it, but not necessarily changing by subtraction, you're changing by adding. If you're in a single player game, say Skyrim, and they add the DLC, you play the added DLC, you can use all the stuff you already had in the game, but you can also additionally unlock and use everything the DLC added.
Right, that's true. Yeah, I could see something I don't know, in my head I think, for example, maybe if you said Skyrim, if we pretended Skyrim didn't have magic or whatever, and it was just a melee fighting game, and then a DLC adds magic, that's still sort of the same loop. You run up to enemies and kill them, but now there's an entirely new, different side. You now have spells and stuff and whatever.
Right.
Which I think that's a good example, yeah. Well, I guess if that's all, I guess we can go ahead and end this meeting here. If anybody has questions or they just want to hang out and talk, I'll be here for a little bit, but I will probably be leaving soon myself. So, but thanks everybody for coming. It was awesome talking to everybody about this stuff. I'm going to try to include some more stuff, some more video game theory stuff in these meetings, because I like having these, discussions about things. I think they're really interesting to hear people's different points of view, and also certain things I heard actually in here are great topics for what I'll probably talk about. Things like Pokemon, the core gameplay loop of games just in general, balancing, all that stuff is really, really important for video game theory. So I'm glad you guys brought that up, so we can probably talk about that, in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be down to stay, but I kind of need to take that CS quiz for 1302 this week. I haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
So, kind of need to get on that.
All right, cool. Sounds good.
All right.
Good luck on that, though.
Well, appreciate it. See y'all later.
Bye.
This was a really good meeting, Rain. Talk to you later, I guess.
Oh, thank you so much. And you too, yeah. Hopefully next week or sometime in between. Probably try to set up some stuff for the officer things. I have that, I have this group chat here if you, for whenever, if I need to address all that stuff, and we can talk about officer, privileges and all that thing. But, yeah, thanks for showing up. I'm glad you enjoyed.